So for the better part of the last 2 weeks, I was at Fantastic Fest, 8 days of weird, wacky, and unique films. I was able to watch 19 movies at the film festival itself, and today I'm going to give you my take on Fantastic Fest 2019. So let's talk about it. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Sean Chandler, and I started this channel because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies way too much. If you can relate, you're probably in the right place. Consider clicking that subscribe button. With that in mind, this is a very different type of video for me. This is going to be more podcast style, free form. I'm going to try and do this in one single take, talk about my entire experience at Fantastic Fest, give you my top 10 favorite movies of the festival, as well as talk about the other movies that I did see sprinkled throughout this. So hopefully I'll be able to give you some movies you should be on the lookout for in the future. I can tell you some fun stories about what happened at the festival and maybe a little bit more. I've never done a video specifically like this before, so we'll figure it all out. If you want to know what videos I talk about inside of this one and when I talk about them, you can look down below in the description if you want to skip ahead to a specific movie to hear my take on it. I did see 19 movies. I am going to talk about all of them in here. So if you want to skip ahead, I'll try and put that down below in the description as well as the pinned comment so you can kind of browse through it a little bit quicker. With that said, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start talking about some of the movies I saw that weren't necessarily my top 10, but the other films I saw. I'll talk about half of them now, and then I'll talk about half of them halfway through my top 10 list. And as I said, as I talk about the movies, if I have a story that goes along with it, I'll kind of give my thoughts on the film, as well as then the stories that went along with my experience of watching that movie. Kicking things off is Iron Fists and High Kicks. This is a documentary on the rise of kung fu movies, starting way back in the 1960s with Shaw Brothers Studios in Hong Kong, and tracing it really all the way up to the last 10 years or so, talking about The Raid and some of the other current films. Really nice little documentary. That it didn't make it into my top 10 on this list is a statement of how many good movies there were. This is a very good documentary. If you like martial arts films, this is a must watch. It gives you a nice history. It frames some things inside of the kind of perspective on things, like why kind of Bruce Lee and martial arts films kind of took off in the African-American community, and kind of give you some of the context for some things like that, as well as just giving you a history of all these movies. As someone that back in the late 90s had a Jackie Chan fan page on the internet, who has been a big fan of Asian cinema, specifically Hong Kong cinema, at different times in my life, this is a very cool documentary. And a lot of kind of these stars that didn't necessarily kind of continue throughout the decades, that disappeared a little bit about 20 years ago. I mean, they're interviewed inside of this. You get some context, a lot of these smaller stories inside of it. So once again, if you're a fan of martial arts films, Asian cinema, this is an absolute must watch. Another one I watched was called The Vast of Night. And this one is about, how to describe this one? It's a little bit of it's supposed to be kind of a cinematic take on the old radio serials of the 30s and the 40s. And kind of has this plot line about what if something strange started happening on a radio signal, and a radio operator and a telephone operator kind of picked up on it, started to investigate some weird thing that was happening inside the city. A lot of people at the festival absolutely loved this film. It was getting a bunch of rave reviews, comparisons to just the fact that it is this film version of the radio serials, as well as kind of Twilight Zone, other things like that, which it's shot beautifully, very cool long takes inside of it. I wasn't a big fan. This was one of my least favorite films that I saw. One of the reasons I didn't want to just rank all these movies is because they're all interesting. Even like ones like this, I found it a little bit too slow paced, too boring, too many single shots of a person telling a story for the amount of plot that it had. So, they're all interesting though, and even if I didn't like it, someone else loved it, so I didn't want to necessarily rank some of these ones, but this one was one of my least favorite ones that I did see at the film festival, while being a very interesting project in and of itself. Next one I'll talk about is The Color Out of Space. Color Out of Space, and what this is a Nicolas Cage film based off of a Lovecraft short story. Kind of somewhat familiar territory for different types of plots, where this family out in the woods, something crash lands in front of their house, and then weird stuff starts to happen throughout the film. As it goes along, you definitely get an insane, wacky, weird performance from Nicolas Cage. When you hear Lovecraft and Nicolas Cage, That is what you get as you go to the second half of this film. So he goes bonkers and starts screaming about his alpacas. It's also very Lovecraftian, so as it goes along, there's body horror, there's weird ambiguities, there's creatures that you don't know what they are, and all of it starts pretty normal, like this kind of quirky family off in the woods, and then just as it goes along, true Lovecraftian stuff starts happening, and all building towards this insane, bonkers, weird, bizarro, psychedelic climax of the film. But there's creepy, gross images, there's bonkers stuff. It's the whole shebang that you want inside of it. But once again, another one that didn't crack my top 10. I was sad that this one didn't make it in there, as it is so bonkers and weird. I just didn't necessarily fully enjoy it as much as some other people. Some other people just love their crazy Nicolas Cage and their Lovecraft. I had fun with the weirdness of it all, but it didn't quite crack my top 10. I'll do one more before I dive into the full of this deal, and we'll go with Memory. This is a documentary about the making of Alien, the original film, from the perspective of trying to get you to understand where things were coming from, not walking you through, and then they cast Sigourney Weaver, and then they cast John Hurt, and then it's not doing that. There's a little hints of some of that inside of it, but it's not really a walking you through the production of the film, and they're not like, and then we had 4 puppeteers operating the xenomorphs. It's not that type of documentary. It's very much digging in deeper into what inspired the screenwriter and his history. And before he did Alien, he did Dark Star with John Carpenter. It was more of a comedy, but had a lot of similar themes inside of it. And that led to the differences here. And that's what I really enjoyed about it. I love to hear where stories come from. And they talked with the screenwriter's wife, and she talked about walking through just his office and these boxes of notebooks of ideas and screenplays that never got made. And these early versions they described the story that he wrote 6 years before he did Alien, that you could tell was the prototype of him wanting to tell a story like this, but it took him the better half of a decade to get it just right to tell the story he wanted to tell. Likewise, they kind of explored the idea of Alien in the context of the post-Star Wars world, the pre-E.T., and how it's kind of an anomaly to have kind of freaky aliens the way that this one did. Where this one lost me, this would have been a top 10 for me, because I love Alien and Alien, and that direction of looking at where the stories come from, I love all that. When you go into the second half of it, it moves away from looking into the history and digging deep into inspiration, and it moves into the category of interpretation. So they have a lot of talking heads just giving their thoughts on what it stands for and how certain things, and like this was an example of trying to take down the patriarchy way before that was like stuff like that. That's like, okay, it feels a little bit like you're taking 21st century ideas and incorporating them on. It's not that there's totally separate from what it's doing, but not everything needs to be interpreted in light of modern times. And so it was a very big shift in the nature of what the documentary was doing when he moved into that second half. And it is not nearly as interesting to me to hear people that are my age, that have been watching it their whole life, just interpreting it in light of their life experience, not in the people that made it and the wives of the people that made it, telling the stories of where it come from. Telling the stories of where it came from is a lot more interesting to me than someone my age interpreting the movie Alien for me. So those are the few that didn't quite crack the top 10. With that said, let's get started with my actual top 10. Coming in at number 10 is The Platform. I believe this is a film from Mexico. And it's, to draw some comparisons, it's like the movie Cube, or basically the idea is that people wake up inside of a cell and they don't fully know how it works. Everyone has a roommate, and they have nothing other than a bathroom and concrete walls all around them and the person inside of there. So our lead character wakes up, and the person across from him has been in here for a while, so he's trying to slowly answer his questions as to what's going on. And then after they've been talking for a little bit, from the ceiling lowers down a platform, the title of the movie, that has a bunch of food on it. We learn that our character's on level 47, and the food has mostly been eaten off of it, so they're basically eating the leftovers. And you discover that because they're on level 47, that means that they're the 47th set of people to eat off of this platform of food. Then the platform lowers down, and you find out there's like 200 levels on side of it. So if you're on level 200, you don't get any food because everyone's already eaten it. so it's just kind of this interesting and at first when you see that, you're like, okay, that's kind of a weird little world building deal. And then you realize that's the central plot line of the film, is this idea of how people eat. And there's a little bit of social commentary inside of it, of like, we have enough food, but if only we would only eat all that we need. Some ideas like that, but it's not too heavy-handed. You're more exploring it from the perspective of not societal injustice, but from the perspective of what can you do as an individual to help the people around you? How do you take personal responsibility to help those around you? So it's got some horror inside. I mean, it gets really gnarly at times when in every month you're in a different level. So guy wakes up on level 47, but in another month he's like level 150 and stuff like that. And then another time he wakes up and he's in the top 10, so there's plenty of food for him. So that's kind of the dynamics of it. Real interesting little claustrophobia film, slight message inside of it. It's got a nice sharp sense of humor inside of it too, for how nasty some of it gets, because when you're on level 150 and you're trying to survive a month and there's a lot of people killing themselves because they don't want to do it, you can see where the plot kind of goes with some of this stuff. Say cannibalism plays into parts of the storyline. But yeah, that's The Platform. Interesting little film. I don't know when it's going to come to the United States, but certainly kept me engaged from beginning to end. At number 9 is going to be Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. So what this is it's a documentary about Mark Patton, the star of Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. And this movie's kind of infamous for the movie had very heavy homoerotic undertones inside of it, a bunch of imagery that's like very, not just Top Gun homoerotic, but like full blown, like where were they going with this? And some oddities inside of his performance. And shortly after the movie came out, and the lead actor inside of it was a closeted homosexual. So when the movie came out, it was in the middle of kind of the AIDS epidemic. And so he kind of got pinpointed as the reason for some of the stuff going on, kind of got blacklisted, a lot of stress on top of him. So he was this rising star in Hollywood, and then he abandoned it for like 20 years, just disappeared from the spotlight so that no one could really find him about 2010. And then when they were doing a documentary about the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, a private investigator found him living in Mexico with a shop, and the guy had just gone off the grid totally. So through that, he kind of got pulled back into it and started doing the Comic-Con circuits and horror, I don't know if it's Comic-Con, but horror cons and things like that. And through it, realized that he wanted his story to be told of how the movie affected him, how the making of it, the backstory. And that's what this documentary is. Basically, it gives you a really interesting perspective on the sort of the making of Nightmare on Elm Street 2, but really how a film can affect an individual and a film's reputation. Because to a bunch of people, it's just a bad movie. It's just a very weird sequel to Nightmare on Elm Street with very strange homoerotic undertones to it and subtext. For years, the screenwriter claimed that he didn't intentionally do that. That's not what he was going for. And then later, once society changed, then he started saying, yeah, I mean, of course it was intentionally inside of there. And so a bunch of people kind of pointed fingers at the actor for putting stuff in there that it was very like this, and the actor had a bunch of bitterness towards the screenwriter that's basically explored in the film as they interview the screenwriter and the actor extensively. And then by the end of it, the two of them meet up to like talk through their differences. All very fascinating stuff on all kinds of things about 80s culture, Hollywood, what really goes on behind the scenes, and then just the making of a movie. I saw it at a screening of it. The actor wasn't in the room and did a Q&A and everything. Very cool stuff. I actually when I was walking to the theater, I guess he was walking out to go to drink at the water fountain or something like that. And he bumped into me, which is one of those surreal moments where you're like, well, the star of this documentary and the star of Nightmare on Elm Street 2 just bumped into me in a door. It's kind of weird. And then he kind of told his stories. But if you're a horror fan, Nightmare on Elm Street fan, there's a bunch of different people that this is absolutely fascinating documentary. At number 8 is going to be Synochronic. This is a more straightforward, I don't know, maybe straightforward. Everything that plays at Fantastic Fest is a little bit weird, so I don't know that any of them necessarily straightforward. But it stars Anthony Mackie and Jamie Dornan. Is that the right guy? Christian Grey from the 50 Shades of Grey movies. Those are the two stars of the movie. And basically a new drug appears on the market that is killing people in very weird ways. And the two lead guys are paramedics that have started to discover this. And then as they're kind of searching through what exactly is going on. One of their daughters goes missing and the other one starts investigating. I don't want to spoil too many plot points, but let's just say there's very science fiction-y in the way time travel starts to play into the plot line inside of it, in drug-induced stuff, psychedelic type stuff, time travel stuff. Very weird movie. If you're going into it trying to, does all of the science make sense and all the rules, it's probably the wrong movie for you. But just as an interesting study of a character, because there's depth to why exactly this character is doing what he's doing. Interesting film that I had a good time with. I haven't seen a bunch of stuff from Christian Grey acting in too many movies since I haven't seen the 50 Shades of Grey movie, so I've only really seen Robin Hood. So I thought he did a really good job in this. Anthony Mackie he's more of a sad character inside of this film than the usual Falcon, charismatic, big personality guy. Except he does a little bit of that here, but it's much more introspective. Enjoyed the movie quite a bit. Next up is going to be The Lighthouse. So this one is it was the secret screening at the film festival. They have two different movies that are secret screenings. Essentially what they do is that as you're they say that there's a secret screening. Sometimes it's something really exciting that's lesser known. Sometimes something not very exciting, but a surprise, all over the place. So this one, The Lighthouse, is a black and white film, shot on film, about two guys at a lighthouse. One is William Dafoe, one is Robert Pattinson, and the power dynamics between the two of them, as William Dafoe is the kind of boss character inside of it, and Robert Pattinson thinks that he's being kind of a jerk inside of it, and he's only friendly at nighttime, but the two of them are stuck there together. So all the dynamics inside of it, as they start to go a little bit crazy, as they're stuck on this lighthouse for months, or this island with a lighthouse on it for months on end. Willem Dafoe won't share some of what's going on. He's very secretive, and as it goes along, each of them gets a little bit crazier and crazier and crazier as the power struggle between the two of them grows and grows and grows. It was a little bit too slow paced for me. Some people left, they were like, oh, it's a masterpiece. It was brilliant. Everything about it was so meticulously crafted, and the way that it was designed and all the imagery and symbolism. That's all true. Performances are great. There's a nice, sharp sense of humor to it. But it's definitely like this art house type film that's shot black and white and about weird images and ambiguity, and you don't know exactly what's real and what's the insanity with the characters. If that's your sort of thing that you like, if you watch the trailer and you're like, oh, that'll probably be great, you'll probably love this. If you watch the trailer, you're like, that just looks pretentious, you'll definitely think the movie's pretentious. I appreciated what they were going for. It kept me, even though it took a lot of effort on my part because I'm more of a fast-paced movie kind of person. But at the end of the day, I found it very fascinating what they were going for and some very cool things inside of it. Coming in at number 6 is WYRM, W-Y-R-M. How to describe this movie? So it's got kind of the aesthetics of Napoleon Dynamite, except it's faster paced, has more kind of plot and depth to it. It's not so much about the big jokes. It has some humor, but it's not about the big jokes as much. The setup at the beginning of it in this movie involves a bunch of big world building, odd stuff to it. That our lead character, Worm, that's his name, has a collar on, and he's the only 9th grade kid that still has his collar, because every kid is, when they go into middle school, is given a collar, and you don't lose your collar until you kiss a girl or a boy, until you have your first romantic kiss. So basically, it takes every pubescent kid's fears and makes them visible. So all the thoughts that everyone, when you're in middle school and high school, that you think that everyone's thinking about you, this movie takes all the insecurities and visualizes them. So that's kind of the setup for the movie, and it has kind of that 80s look to it, the framing of shots, the color scheme of Napoleon Dynamite. But as it moves along, you realize it's actually a movie about tragedy and how people deal with death and loss, and it takes that idea of doing very literal versions of the way people deal with things. So the same way that a collar is used to visualize the insecurities of a 9th grade boy, it does very literal interpretations of the way that parents would deal with the loss of a child in being distant or being disconnected or being present but absent at the same time. And it does all that very literally. Very interesting film, the way that it was able to take do allegorical storytelling in such literal ways at the same exact time. I'm very impressed by it. I mean, this is not a studio film at all. This is like a movie that just someone made on their own and put together. Very cool film. I don't know when it's going to be released. I say you definitely should be out on the lookout for this one. I thought it worked, made me laugh. It explored ideas, and it definitely touched on some really good emotions. From there, we'll move into 4 more of our movies that didn't crack our top 10. First one is going to be Koko-Di Koko-Da. This is a Swedish horror film, I believe, based off a Swedish and Danish children's rhyme. And the story involves a couple who experience some tragedy in the prologue of the film. A couple years later, they go on a vacation, and then some psychos start tormenting them throughout the film and kills them. But it's kind of shows the story again and again as the couple, who are very distant at the beginning because of the loss that they experienced. As each cycle of this, they kind of grow closer together. So the sort of idea inside of it, very heavy with imagery, symbolism, what's going on. The lead guy in the group of psychos, unbelievably creepy looking dude, and his gleeful, terrifying grin that he has on his face with all of this. I don't know if some of it was just lost in translation, or if you know the rhyme, or if some of the, culturally speaking, the movie just didn't click for me. By the end of it, there's things about it that I thought were very effective, but my general impression was like, I feel like there's a gap between where I'm at and where they're at with their storytelling here. So it was one that I wasn't crazy about. It was also one of my least favorite films from the festival. A lot of cool imagery, the way they would transition between different things, where they would do kind of these shadow puppet shows inside of it to kind of demonstrate things, but it's all very metaphoric and illustrations that I'm also just not wired that way. So some of it is just not designed for a person the way that I'm wired. So I wasn't crazy about this one. But all of these movies, as I said, almost every single movie at this festival, even if I didn't like it, someone else loved it because they're all very interesting in what they're trying to do. Next movie we're going to talk about on here will be The Shadow of the Moon. I actually put a review of this one out on my channel before. This is a Netflix original film, as Michael C. Hall, Boyd Holbrook. I actually got to work the red carpet for this movie. It was really cool. Second red carpet I ever worked, the first one being for Jojo Rabbit 2 days before this one. But so, I mean, I was right there on the line as the lead, the director, the writers, producers, and then the main actors of it walked down and to be interviewed by us. I didn't have a person with me to run the camera, so I didn't try and cause too much trouble and ask too many questions. I didn't do anything like that, but got to shake some hands a little bit with them. So it's pretty cool just to be there, get the opportunity to be on the red carpet. The movie itself was kind of a interesting genre blender. It's got a little bit of horror. It's heavy on kind of a serial killer murder investigation. Then it's got sci-fi elements inside of it, where the killer inside the story comes back every 9 years, and it seems like they haven't changed at all in those 9 years. You're trying to figure out what exactly is going on. So you see our lead character throughout the decades as he kind of goes into this obsession. Because that, it also got could feel a little bit familiar. While the mix of all these genres was kind of new and different, the specific sci-fi elements, the specific person becomes obsessed with the case, all of it felt kind of familiar. So it was a movie that it's pretty easy for me to watch, enjoyable because I like the genre, or genres, but it also wasn't a film that I thought in the end fully worked. But I have a review for it. You can check out right up there if I remember to put the little dealio in there. Next one is Fracture, another Netflix original film. It's coming out next month. This was probably the least interesting movie that I saw at the festival. It's basically a psychological thriller where a guy is in an accident with his daughter, takes his daughter to the hospital, and then his wife and daughter go missing. And so you're trying to figure out what's going on. Is he losing his mind? Is he crazy? Was he injured too much? Is something going on at the hospital? And as it goes along, I felt it just kind of got worse and worse and worse as it gave you more. It was kind of interesting to me, like, what's going on here? This is fascinating. And then it started to give you answers. And you're like, wait, I don't like where this is going. And then it keeps going in directions that I didn't like. So by the end of it, it was like, that was not a ride I felt was worth going down. And then also of the movies at the festival, kind of one of the more mainstream films. It's not a low budget film. It's not an indie film. It's not a foreign film or anything like that. This is a Netflix original. So it had the budget. It just didn't have a story that I thought was very good. And where it ended up taking everything, I didn't find particularly satisfying in the end. Next one on here I'm going to talk about is the Golden Glove. Whew! The Golden Glove. So when I saw this one, I was like, Golden Glove, I wonder if it's a boxing movie. I didn't really know much of a lot of these movies. You just don't know anything about the movie before you're going into it because they're smaller films, they are foreign films, and they might not have a release in the United States ever besides being at the film festival. So I go into this one knowing almost nothing about it. I believe it's a German film, and it's about a serial killer, a real-life serial killer that actually lived. And it's just this very bleak, straight take on it of, like, let's just show you what really happened in the depths of man's depravity, and that kind of dwells in that space. Incredibly well done. I was kind of captivated from beginning to end. And at the same time, disgusted, would never rewatch it, would never recommend it to another human being. Very interesting film in that way of being like, okay, I don't like this at all, but man, I can't stop watching it. And it's not that it was bad. It's not a movie that it was like, I don't like the way it turned out or anything like that. It's because the subject matter and the just straight take on it is just so vile. Even outside of even the serial killer stuff, it explores alcoholism and addiction on this level of the Golden Glove. Inside of it is a bar. And basically this serial killer, what he would do is he would find these desperate old women at this bar that couldn't afford alcohol. And he had a job so he could afford alcohol. So he would lure them back to his apartment. And because they're so desperate for another drink that they would let him do things. And then he would do things. I mean, it's just really vile, grotesque stuff. And you're just seeing it there. And it's like, this is such a great portrayal of how bad mankind can be. At the same time, I wish I wasn't watching this right now. So if you want to watch just a bleak, dark film, this is one to check out. I mean, the acting's great. I mean, it's just a very difficult film to watch. And also it has this is an even tougher thing to say. It's a movie that has a very interesting sense of humor. So you're watching just vile stuff happen, and then it has a laugh in the middle of it where you're like, oh, I laughed at that. Oh no, what does that say about me that he got me to so you type of movie you want to go take a shower while you were watching it before you could even finish it. Also say, as I finish talking about this one, before the movie started, the person that introduced it said she read all these reviews off of Rotten Tomatoes. It was like vile, disgusting, depraved, like that. And then she goes, well, time to start the movie. I would say enjoy, but I really don't think that you should enjoy this movie given the subject matter. It's like, okay, that's not a good sign. Then they played an intro from the director himself, and he talked through what he was trying to do with it and how he was from the community, from the neighborhood where this happened, and his dad knew the serial killer. That he's like, yeah, I would ride the bus with him, and then we discovered what he was really up to. And he goes, at the end of it, he goes, this isn't really a movie you recommend to anybody, but it's a story I thought needed to be told. It's like, okay, the director is telling me not to recommend it to me, and the person announcing it saying don't enjoy it. What did I just get myself in for? All right, and the last movie I saw at this one was JALLIKATTU, which is an Indian film, but not Bollywood. So Bollywood, I guess, is North India, but other parts of India put out films, and so this is from the southern part of India. And so it's not, when you think Bollywood, some of the stuff that's not what this is like. This one was about like a village, and the buffalo in the village escapes, and so everyone in the village is trying to like capture the buffalo, but because it escaped, and because it's this village where a buffalo would be worth a lot of money, but it's a lot of food, so it's very valuable. So everyone is trying to be the person to catch it. So it's both like this very odd adventure of people trying to set traps to catch a buffalo and wrestle it down and everything like that, while being a comedy about all the wackiness going on inside of the city, while also being kind of this story about mob rule and mob mentality. It just kind of gets, the city starts getting a little bit crazier as it goes along, as everyone is desperate to be the one to get it, and they're making dumber and dumber choices in the process because of that. For me, this was This was a frustrating one for me that they sold us they basically announced it as it's one part Heart of Darkness, it's one part Mad Max Fury Road, and one part 2001: A Space Odyssey. And you hear that, you're like, what are you talking about? Because you just said this is a movie about being in an Indian village trying to track down a buffalo, and it's 2001 Mad Max. And so they sold it as this kind of wild, nonstop adventure, and it's not really that. So I went in being primed for a movie that it wasn't. So I think that heavily tainted my experience watching the film, because when they said Mad Max Fury Road, I had one set of expectations about the pacing, the nature of it, and it's not really that at all. It's a movie that has some little chase sequences and action sequences involving the buffalo and all these villagers like trying to corner in a room and being thrown through walls. It has some of that, catching it in a hole and things. But for the most part, it's not really that. It's more about the politics of this village and the comedy that comes with that and the bad choices and things like that. So if I'd gone in expecting kind of village comedy and political commentary, I would have thought one way. The other thing about this one that was absolutely fascinating to me is one of the most films with some of the most Christian imagery that I've seen, which generically speaking, I don't go to movies thinking there's going to be a lot of Christian type stuff inside of it. But this village, I mean, they talk about their church. There's crosses everywhere. They talk about going to mass. And so it's very interesting just to watch a movie that's set in India, a village in India that was, I guess, heavily converted by Christianity. And it was just kind of a natural part of the tale that they were telling, which is interesting. That's not what I would expect from a movie from India, but then again, that's the part of the fun of watching, and the enriching part of watching films from around the world is you discover things that you didn't know. You wouldn't have known otherwise. I would not have known that that would be a possibility, but there it was inside of the film. With that said, let's get started just diving into the top 5 here. Coming in at number 5 is going to be Jojo Rabbit. This is another one. I already put up a review for it. You can see my review for it right up there if I remember to put the stuff up there for it. But so Jojo Rabbit is Taika Waititi's World War II satire about a boy whose best friend is an imaginary Hitler who's kind of a goofball, whose understanding of Jews is challenged when he meets a girl. It's an absurdist comedy. It's all about showing how insane and ridiculous fascism and hate really are, and kind of teaching us the power of love and things like that. I thought it worked a lot better as a comedy than it did as a drama. I think for a few reasons inside of that, of what they were trying to do, is it's just such a tough balance to be able to have the heartfelt moments with how far it goes with the wacky comedy. And so it goes for some heartfelt. I mean, it has some dark stuff inside because you're talking about World War II, but it didn't always hit as well as the comedy landed really well for me. And the other thing with it was that that it was going for a PG-13 rating because Taika Waititi wanted younger children to be able to watch it, to be able to see this lesson about how ridiculous hate really is, and the importance of getting to really know and understand people, not believe ridiculous things about them. I think that softened some of the horrors of it. There are scenes in it where I was like, oh man, how are they going to show this? Because it's World War II and there's something terrible about to happen. And there's some things that should have happened in certain sequences that would have been very violent and very disturbing, but you can't really do that in a PG-13 movie. So it felt like it nerfed down World War II because it had to for the rating for the film so it could be played. And so that's that balance of you want to make it so all the people that you want to see it to be able to see it, but sometimes that comes at a cost, and I felt it hurt it a little bit. Still a great film. Number 5 movie this film festival, a bunch of movies that I absolutely love, but and the reason I've kind of focused on some of the negatives is because people are talking about best picture and favorite movie of the year. I really enjoyed it, but I'm not in that best movie of the year category. Coming in at number 4 for me is going to be Parasite. This is one that has been getting some crazy buzz from the festival circuit over the last couple months. It's a Korean film that, because it's called Parasite, I didn't know what to expect going into this movie. I really had no idea. Parasite, what on earth is this movie going to be about? What the movie is about is an impoverished Korean family basically finds a way to kind of con a upper class family into hiring them as their house servants. So they basically kind of lied to them about being art tutors and a driver and housemaid so that they can get a job. So they lie to them, get this job. And while it's like a kind of a screwball comedy of sorts for the first 75%, and then you start to get into it. It starts getting more and kind of making some commentary about the desperation of the impoverished and kind of class jealousy, as well as the way that certain classes look down, and looking at it from so many different perspectives through the lens of a story that in and of itself kind of works and is fascinating and is interesting, while having a lot to say, having a distinct point of view, and trying to make you think about class inequality and things like that, without just being too preachy and without being too singularly dogmatic. What it doesn't come off like is just saying rich people bad, poor people good. No, the poor people do a bunch of really bad things and the rich people do a bunch of really good things. And then other times inside of it, you're like, the rich people seem really clueless about what's going on in society, and they're not paying attention to what is going on with other people. And then you see the poor people do some just vile, evil things, not just bad things, not just things that they didn't, like they were forced into a bad situation, but they do some evil things inside of the film. So it looks at it from all the different perspectives of the complexities that come about from all of this. And that's what stories like this are supposed to do. Tell an interesting story in and of itself that makes you laugh, that makes you smile, makes you feel emotions, but at the same time makes you think about something inside of society without just preaching at you, without just having a character laying out the director's perspective on all this. No, the story itself helps you look at it from different perspectives, and I thought it did all of that in a very effective manner. A bunch of people saying this is the best movie of the year. Some people call it a masterpiece. And those are people that view probably enjoy movies for their message more than I do. I'm an entertainment guy. I'm kind of a Neanderthal myself. And so people that like depth to them, you're going to absolutely love this movie. In third place is VFW. This is another one I've already posted a review for it. You can check that out right up here if I remember to put the card up there when I'm done filming all of this. But man, this is the movie that I'm guessing I'm going to kind of be joyfully, gleefully recommending to people until it comes out, and then after it comes out. Basically, it's a homage to John Carpenter films, except done heavy metal style and with 21st century energy, blood, and gore. So it's very much kind of one of these siege movies, Assault on Precinct 13. A lot of aesthetics about it will remind you of Escape from New York, that type of John Carpenter movies. The main plot line basically involves a girl steals the drugs from a group of drugged out mutants and runs into a VFW, Veterans of Foreign War bar, to seek refuge. The mutants attack the bar and the veterans go into action to try and protect the girl. And then our movie ensues, and the cast of the movie: Stephen Lang, Martin Kove being the evil sensei from Karate Kid, William Sadler, Fred Williamson, like a bunch of. It's kind of like The Expendables that you never knew that you wanted. I would never pick this cast, and it's a fantastic cast. I just love this movie. This is the type of movie I love to discover. Go into it with no expectations and watch it, and watch Stephen Lang as the leader, a bartender who goes back into war as this veteran, chopping up these freaked out mutants. They don't have a bunch of weapons with them, so they're using bats and they're making little bombs out of what's inside of the bar and grabbing a buzzsaw. That's the movie that you're in for. If John Carpenter style movie involving drugged out mutants getting taken out by a bunch of old guy veterans sounds amazing to you, you will love this movie. Other cool thing about this movie is that I walked into the theater to sit down for my seat. I was about to sit down. I look in the row behind me, and it's Chris Stuckman, the Chris Stuckman. He was at the film festival, and I've been looking for him because I know who he is, obviously. And some of things on my channel taken inspiration from him. So I saw him there, shook his hand, like, hey man, can I sit next to you? Absolutely. And I got to talk with him for like 15, 20 minutes before the movie, talked with him a little bit afterwards, took a picture with him. Real friendly, great guy. So that was really neat. That was a really neat experience. That I'm a real shy, introverted person. So if I just seen him randomly in the hallway, I'm like, hey man, it would have been awkward. It would have been crazy weird. But I can sit next to someone, have a normal conversation with. So luckily, I got to have the normal, organic conversation with him that I didn't come off like too much of a weirdo inside. But that was probably the highlight of the whole week for me. And I worked red carpets, was shaking hands of a couple of movie stars and things like that, and Taika Waititi. But actually getting to talk with Chris Stuckman was probably the highlight of the film festival for me. Our runner-up here is going to be Dolemite Is My Name. So I mentioned before that we have secret screenings at the film festival. This was the first secret screening. And there had been rumors the movie's going to be Joker. There was rumors that it was going to be Doctor Sleep, Zombieland 2. So I was thinking those movies. So when they announced, and the movie is Dolemite Is My Name, I was like, oh man, okay, well, I'm here. I guess I got to watch this. But I was not looking forward to it. I was very, like, just because I had expectations of one of these more mainstream things that I was more familiar with, I was disappointed that they went with Dolemite Is My Name. Loved the movie. I loved it. It was my top movie until my number one movie played, which was the last movie I saw at the film festival. So Dolemite Is My Name. Basically, think of it as the disaster artist for blaxploitation films. Back in the 70s, a blaxploitation film came out called Dolemite from a comedian who kind of was this self-made man, and it's kind of one of these infamously so bad it's good movies that you don't understand why you're like, it's unbelievably bad what's happening inside of this film, but it's incredibly enjoyable to watch, much like The Room, which led to The Disaster Artist. So this is kind of the story of how Dolemite, the movie, got made. And it's like totally different. The humor inside of it is totally different from The Disaster Artist. The story of blaxploitation versus Tommy Wiseau's The Room, totally different. But it touches on a lot of similar themes in different ways. Both of them kind of have deep ideas about friendship, but tackles them in totally different ways. Both of them kind of explore the idea of filmmaking and just a person being like, I want to make a movie. Like I just would love to tell a story, and then trying to get it made, but it does it in very different ways. And then likewise in each situation, they thought they were making one thing and it turned out like that they were just making a good movie. And it turns out they made a movie that people loved for different reasons than they thought. And so learning to accept that, but it does each of those in different ways. So like I said, there's a bunch of comparisons to The Disaster Artist as well as The Room, but all tackled in totally different ways. It stars, Eddie Murphy is the lead guy. And this is the best I've seen Eddie Murphy in 30 years. I haven't seen everything he's done. I haven't seen Dreamgirls and some of the other things where I've heard that he was great in. So of things that I have seen with Eddie Murphy, this is the best he has been in 30 years. In which case, maybe the best he's ever been. Because he's the funny guy, but he's also the actor. And he's the comedian guy inside of it. So he's playing a character, and the character plays the Dolemite personality inside of it. And what makes for interesting dynamics with this is that the Dolemite character that he's playing, that's both, he does a comedy routine as Dolemite, and then the movie stars the Dolemite character, is just this sleazy pimp character. But the guy himself isn't really like that. He's not a woman. He's not sleeping around, and he's not doing a bunch of drugs. He's kind of a sweet, friendly guy that just wants to do stuff with his friends, and he's a hustler. He's trying to get things done, and he's a BSer, and so he's just BSing his way to make things happen. And so there's just something very charming about the character, while he's not the typical, stereotypical, charismatic leading man at all. He's just this guy that has so much energy for the things that he's working on in his projects, and he's so positive for the people around him. And he's a guy that puts other people in the spotlight and wants to give them a chance, that you just love this character. Throw into the mix, there's so many cameos inside of it. A standout is Wesley Snipes as the director of the movie, who's kind of this pretentious guy making this very non-pretentious film. But everyone in it is really quite wonderful. It's real funny. It's heartfelt. It's interesting. It's this sort of movie you watch it and you go, now I need to check out Dolemite. I need to look into this act, the main guy, Ray Moore. I need to look into him, and then I need to look into Dolemite and all the stuff that went along with that, and all of it. So just be on the lookout for this one. It's going to hit Netflix next month. It is rated R. It's got a lot of language, a ton of language inside of it. It has some nudity inside of it, but it's definitely an R-rated film. But also, if you're grown up, highly recommend you check it out. It's especially if you like The Disaster Artist, or if you liked Ed Wood. It's from the writers of Ed Wood. If you like those types of movies, this is a must watch. One of my favorite movies of the year. Speaking of favorite movies of the year, coming in at number one is going to be Knives Out. This is another one that I already did a review for. You can check that out right up there, assuming I remember to put the little card up there. So Knives Out is a murder mystery whodunit from Rian Johnson of Looper and Last Jedi fame. He was in attendance. He was actually just wandering around the festival for about 3 days. So after it was done, after I'd watched Knives Out, I was just standing in the lobby and actually kind of helped tear some things down and carried a podium upstairs. Went into a projection room at a movie theater for the first time in my entire life, and come downstairs. I'm just in the lobby, and he's just standing there. I mean, there's 15 people in the lobby. He's there just like everyone else, taking selfies in front of this big poster that says Knives Out. Real friendly, nice guy. When I mentioned he was there, people were like, he ruined my childhood, he's the worst. I was like, he seemed like a really nice guy to me. I mean, of the red carpets, he would literally, when he did the red carpet for the movie, he would talk to everyone for like 5 minutes. Like, this red carpet went on forever because he's just chatting with the people, being super friendly, and seems like a nice guy. So you might not have liked what he did Last Jedi. I didn't, but the guy himself doesn't seem to be super. Anyway, back to Knives Out. I already got the review. If you want me to full details on it, I loved it. I just loved it. It's got a great mystery with mysteries inside of it. They're layered on top of each other, and you have the who done it and the what's going on and who hired this person, why is this happening, layered on top of each other in a way that keeps you guessing. In the movie, has a big reveal about every 20 or 30 minutes. Every 20, 30 minutes, you learn something that turns the movie upside down, and you reinterpret everything you just saw, and it changes the trajectory moving forward. So it just keeps changing up the game of what things are happening and what you think the movie is about. All of it leading up to a third act where you do kind of get some of the things that you want from the genre of the explanations and stuff like that, and final reveals. It has everything you want from the genre, but done in this new, fresh way, and fantastic cast. Daniel Craig's a standout. Chris Evans is a standout. Chris Evans playing, both of them playing against what you know them for. So you know Daniel Craig mostly for Bond and more serious characters with a little bit of charm inside of it. This is like full hammy, going for it, comedy detective character. It is really funny stuff. Chris Evans is doing this very snarky character, the opposite of much more Johnny Storm as opposed to Steve Rogers, and just playing the jerk, which you don't normally think of him because he's so known for being the nicest of the Avengers. But I thought it was funny. The mystery worked. Everything about it worked inside of it. So I just absolutely, I love this. It was exactly what I wanted it to be. So anyway, there you have it. There's my take on Fantastic Fest, on all the movies, different opinions, reviews, all of that fun stuff. Hopefully this was useful for you. I've been trying to figure out how to talk about 19 different movies that you haven't heard of, so you don't even know where to look for them or anything like that. So hopefully this was helpful for you, and maybe I'll do more videos like this in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.